Some men don't need enemies to destroy them. They do a fine job all on their own. Not with punches, not with betrayals, but with something far more subtle and dangerous, their own words. Words that roll off the tongue, sounding bold, confident, even wise. But scratch the surface, and you'll find fear dressed up in false strength. Laziness disguised as philosophy. You've heard these phrases before, maybe even used them yourself. They're the kind of statements that signal something tragic: a man has stopped growing. He's no longer curious, no longer pushing himself. He's chosen comfort over character. And that choice, it doesn't explode his life in one moment. It erodes it quietly, slowly, word by careless word. The Stoics said it best: speech is the mirror of the mind. That's not just poetic, it's a brutal truth. Because if your words reflect who you really are inside, then excuses, arrogance, and emotional numbness aren't just personality quirks, they're warning signs, markers of internal decay. And here's the harsh reality: when your words are built on ego avoidance or fear, your life begins to follow. Not all at once, but gradually, in the most dangerous way, silently. This video isn't here to be nice. We're not here to pat you on the back or wrap harsh truths in sugar. We're here to shine a light on 6 of the dumbest things men say, phrases that sound harmless, but chip away at your strength, your relationships, your identity. The kind of things that make you feel like a man for a second, but slowly rob you of your manhood. And the worst part, you don't even realize it until the damage is already done. But this isn't just a hit piece. This is a wake-up call. For every broken phrase, I'll show you the Stoic version, the one that builds character instead of breaking it. Because words aren't just sounds, they are tools. And like any tool, they either build something strong or cut something down. You choose which. If you've ever said something and instantly felt weaker for it, if you've ever wished you could rewind time and respond with strength instead of insecurity, this video is going to sting in the best possible way. Before we dive in, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment that says, "I'd rather be silent than sound like a fool." Let's break the silence before your words do more damage than your worst enemy ever could. Here's the first one. That's just how I am. Sounds tough, right? Like you're owning your identity, like you're standing your ground. But let's be honest, it's one of the most dangerous phrases a man can speak. It's not a declaration of self-awareness. It's a declaration of surrender. And not to truth, not to principle, but to stagnation. It's what a man says when he's stopped trying, when he's decided that growth is someone else's job and comfort is king. This phrase is usually spoken by men who confuse being stubborn with being strong, who think standing still is the same as standing tall. But here's the truth: refusing to evolve isn't integrity, it's fear in disguise. It's ego wearing a lazy mask. Growth takes real courage. Reflecting, admitting you were wrong, daring to change, that's power. Saying "that's just who I am" is the verbal equivalent of throwing your hands up and quitting the game. I once knew a man like that. Carl, retired Navy. The kind of guy who looked like he had it all together. Always well-dressed, always composed. When he walked into a room, people noticed. But behind closed doors, Carl was stuck, frozen. Every time his wife asked for deeper connection, he shut her down with, "I'm not built like that." When his son wanted to talk about old wounds, Carl waved it off with, "That's not how I do things." No yelling, no chaos, just silence, stillness. Nothing moved, and eventually nothing remained. His wife didn't leave in anger. She left in silence. Not because she hated him, but because she had waited too long for a man who refused to grow. His relationships didn't end with drama, they ended with dust. That's the cost of that phrase. Not just missed opportunities, not just frozen emotions, but the slow, silent collapse of everything meaningful. When you say "that's just how I am," what you're really saying is, "I'm done. Done evolving, done stretching, done showing up for the people who love you." You're not drawing a line in the sand. You're digging your own grave. And here's what a Stoic man says instead: "I can change. I'm not perfect, but I'm improving." Because that's real strength. So we've seen how a simple phrase like, "That's just how I am," can quietly poison a man's growth. But there's another one equally dangerous that wears the mask of strength while building a prison around your soul. This next phrase sounds like conviction, but it's actually a life sentence dressed in false confidence. It's the voice of a man who's given up, not loudly but silently. Stoic philosophy has no patience for this kind of self-abandonment. The Stoics taught that life is a journey of constant refinement, not rigid identity. Seneca said it best, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." Let that settle in. The longer you live, the more you should be adjusting, reevaluating, growing. That truth doesn't get weaker with age, it hits harder. Because the older you get, the easier it is to mistake years for wisdom. But time alone doesn't guarantee insight. You can have experience without growth. And a man who keeps using the same tired excuse year after year, he becomes a statue of himself, cold, still unmoved, and eventually forgotten. A stoic man doesn't hide behind who he used to be. He refines who he is. He listens not because he's soft, but because he's strong enough to know he still has something to learn. He understands that every sunrise brings another opportunity to sharpen his edges. That's real discipline. Not clinging to the past, but choosing progress over pride. The man who says, "That's just how I am," hasn't just stopped growing, he started to decay. And decay, unlike death, is subtle. It spreads quietly. It touches your tone. It shrinks your world. First, your words get shorter. Then your mind closes tighter. Eventually, your life narrows into a routine of resistance, a loop of excuses and isolation. And one day he wakes up with nothing but that same worn-out phrase, and a long list of people who stopped waiting for him to change. The Stoic doesn't wear identity like armor. He doesn't freeze himself in time and call it strength. Instead, he uses truth like a whetstone, sharp, raw, and real. He adjusts, he adapts, he evolves. Not because society demands it, but because his own soul refuses to remain stagnant. That's what real masculinity looks like. Constant, quiet refinement. And if that first phrase didn't hit hard enough, this next one might just leave a mark. Let's talk about the man who confuses silence with strength and uses that confusion to hide from everything real. Real men don't talk about feelings. How many times have we heard that one? According to the American Psychological Association, men who suppress their emotions are at significantly higher risk of depression, heart disease, and even dying younger. Think about that. Swallowing your feelings doesn't just hurt your soul, it hurts your body. And yet, despite the science, despite the evidence, this lie gets passed down from man to man like some toxic heirloom. Worn like a badge of honor, clung to like a symbol of manhood. But what it really is a shield, a brittle one, built from fear. Men who live by this phrase aren't showing strength, they're dodging a war. An inner war, one they're terrified to face. Because feeling means vulnerability. And vulnerability, that's not weakness, that's truth. That's what makes you real. So we've exposed the lie that real men don't talk about feelings, not because Stoics are weak, but because they understand that silence can sometimes be the loudest kind of suffering. But let's go deeper. Because this isn't just about masculinity, it's about hiding. Emotional suppression is like closing the blinds during a storm and pretending everything's fine. You think you're protecting yourself. You think shutting down will make the chaos pass. But it doesn't. It just turns the pain inward. The confusion simmers, the resentment builds, and without warning, it all erupts, sometimes as rage, sometimes as addiction, sometimes as complete emotional disconnection. What begins as keeping it all inside becomes something darker, emotional rot. A slow erosion that eats away at the man you're trying so hard to hold together. A man who believes he has to bury everything just to earn respect doesn't realize that he's not protecting his dignity, he's burying himself alive. Breath by breath, word by unsaid word. And here's where Stoicism often gets misunderstood. People hear control your emotions and assume it means deny them. But that's not Stoicism. That's cowardice dressed up as composure. That's avoidance. The Stoics never said, "Don't feel." They said, "Feel clearly. Feel truthfully. Understand what moves inside you so it doesn't control you from the shadows." Take Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful emperors in history. He didn't hide from emotion. He didn't numb himself into robotic detachment. In the privacy of his journal, he wrote openly about his fears, his grief, his flaws. Not because he wanted pity, because he knew that if he didn't confront what lived in him, it would eventually take control. He didn't broadcast his struggles, he faced them. He studied them. He disarmed them. That's Stoicism. The Stoic man doesn't run from feeling, he runs from being ruled by feelings he hasn't named. That's the difference. Emotional maturity doesn't mean breaking down in public or wearing your heart on your sleeve. But it also doesn't mean turning your heart into stone. It means being still enough to observe what's happening inside. Not dramatize it, not deny it, just see it clearly, honestly, ruthlessly. And from that clarity respond. Not from panic, not from pride, but from power. Because the truth is, men who refuse to talk about what they carry usually carry the heaviest load. And the longer they stay silent, the tighter the grip of that weight. They believe that by showing no cracks, they'll protect themselves. But they forget that it's the cracks that let light in. It's the breaks in the wall that allow wisdom to seep through. To speak of what troubles you calmly, clearly without fear, is not weakness. It's strength in its rarest form. Because the man who never talks about his inner life is often the one most controlled by it. And if you don't admit the truth to yourself now, someone else will end up living in the fallout of your silence. Your wife, your children, your friends, your future. Stoicism doesn't demand silence. It demands honesty. You don't need to cry in front of strangers, but you do need to stop pretending you don't feel. Because pretending not to feel, that's the first lie. And every lie after that gets easier until you don't even recognize yourself anymore. It's not explosive. It doesn't scream. But it spreads like mold under the surface of your life. It's the phrase where blame begins to fester, where a man surrenders his integrity without even realizing it. Let's talk about the man who dodges accountability every time with just 4 words. It's not my fault. We've just uncovered how silence, when mistaken for strength, can quietly rot a man from the inside. But now we arrive at a phrase that doesn't just rot from within, it corrodes everything around it. It's subtle, reflexive, and deeply destructive. Few sentences reveal a man's inner weakness faster than this one. It's not my fault. At first glance, it sounds like a defense, a way to explain, to justify. But underneath, it's not a shield. It's a surrender. This is the language of a man who has quietly given up control over his own life. A man who believes the world simply happens to him, that he is always the victim, never the cause, never the solution, just a bystander in his own story. And that belief, it doesn't just chip away at his dignity, it sterilizes his entire existence. It removes all sense of agency. It shrinks life down to a series of things that happen to him, not things he can shape, steer, or own. The Stoics saw this mindset as the beginning of moral decay, a slow unraveling of responsibility. Epictetus wrote, "It is not events that disturb us, but our opinions about them." That quote might seem simple, but it holds the weight of centuries. What it means is this: your circumstances are rarely your true enemy. It's how you interpret them that gives them power. And no interpretation is more poisonous than the one that says someone else is always to blame. A man who constantly points fingers at the economy, at his boss, at his wife, his childhood, his ex, his enemies, or even fate, isn't explaining his pain. He's giving away his power. And the longer he lives in that mindset, the more deaf he becomes to the one voice that could actually save him, his own. Marcus Aurelius warned, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not just philosophy, that's freedom. The man who refuses to accept this truth isn't stoic. He's shackled, not by fate, but by excuses. Blame is easy. It's automatic. It's a knee-jerk reaction for men who've never learned to pause and reflect. Responsibility, on the other hand, that takes structure, that takes guts. It means you stop waiting for apologies. You stop hoping the conditions magically improve. And instead you ask one brutal transformative question: what can I control? And the answer, whether you're 22 or 72, is always the same: your reaction, your direction, your discipline. This lesson hits hardest for older men, those who've lived through real hardship, financial scars, emotional trauma, spiritual drought. And yes, many of those wounds weren't self-inflicted. Life hit them hard. People betrayed them. Systems failed them. But carrying that pain into the future, like it's a permission slip to stay stuck, that's not strength. That's cowardice. It's cowardice with a long memory. The Stoic doesn't deny that injustice exists, but he refuses to live in reaction to it. Seneca put it simply and powerfully: a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. Life will rub you raw. That's inevitable. But blaming the friction, that doesn't make you tougher. Enduring it with grace and learning to adapt, that's what builds a man. So the next time something falls apart and that old phrase starts rising in your throat, "It's not my fault," I want you to catch it. Hold it, replace it. Don't say it's not my fault. Say it's now my responsibility. Because that shift, that quiet moment where you choose ownership is everything. It's the difference between a man who stays bitter and one who becomes better. And now we go even deeper into the entitled mindset, into a phrase so common it's practically part of our culture. It's the voice of mediocrity disguised as confidence. Let's talk about what happens when a man believes he deserves more without earning any of it. Next up, I deserve. We just explored how blame steals your power, but entitlement drains your soul. Quietly, slowly, and often it sounds deceptively noble. Few phrases carry the quiet arrogance of "I deserve better." It slips out like a statement of self-worth. But more often than not, it's a disguise, a mask for resentment and laziness. It sounds like confidence, but listen closely and you'll hear the sigh of a man who's stopped doing the work, a man who's waiting, not building, demanding, not developing. He expects something higher, cleaner, richer, but rarely earns it. He wants life or other people to hand him the rewards that only come to those who grind in silence. But Stoicism dismantles this mindset from the foundation. It teaches a hard truth: life owes you nothing. Not love, not respect, not recognition, and dignity. That doesn't come from what you think you're entitled to. It comes from what you cultivate with discipline, with integrity, no matter the outcome. Marcus Aurelius captured it in one sharp sentence: "Do not waste time wondering what a good man should be. Be one." That single line cuts straight through entitlement. It doesn't ask what you've been denied. It asks what you're doing right now to align with virtue. The man who says "I deserve better" usually has blind spots. He thinks he's doing more than he really is. He expects more than he's earned. He's traded humility for hunger and craftsmanship for complaint. But the Stoic doesn't walk through life with a checklist of what he's owed. He walks with discipline, with silence, with the steady willingness to do hard things without asking the world to clap for him. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That's the opposite of entitlement. That's the embodiment of discipline. Entitled men often mistake dissatisfaction for growth, but those two things are not the same. Dissatisfaction without discipline leads to bitterness. Growth requires discomfort. It demands responsibility. It asks for restraint. And not once does the Stoic say, "I want what's mine." Instead, he says, "I will become what I admire, regardless of what I receive." This mindset becomes especially tempting as men grow older. When relationships cool, when careers slow down, when the applause fades. That's when "I deserve better" creeps in, not as a rallying cry, but as a whisper of bitterness. It's easy to blame others for not seeing your worth. But here's the hard truth: if you spend more time announcing your value than developing it, you've already lost the thread. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And one of the greatest wastes, demanding rewards for work you never actually did." A man of depth of substance, a Stoic man, doesn't say "I deserve better." He asks himself, "Am I still sharpening?" Because that question holds him accountable, not to the prize, but to the process. And when a man falls too deep into entitlement, the next phase is worse. He doesn't just grow bitter, he retreats, not to regroup, but to avoid. He slips into a mindset where mediocrity becomes the ceiling, where the bare minimum becomes the new identity. Let's talk about the next phrase, one that signals not just laziness, but a quiet abandonment of leadership. "That's not my job." You've heard it. You may have even said it. But what does it really mean? It's the mantra of men who've quietly stopped leading, but still want to be seen as reliable. It's a phrase that pretends to set boundaries, but really it's just avoidance dressed up as maturity. Men who live by this phrase shrink their presence. They shrink their usefulness. They shrink their entire role until all that's left is obligation and routine. They confuse doing the least with staying balanced, and slowly they trade meaning for comfort. Their value gets tied only to what's on a list, what's been assigned, what's safe, not an ounce more. I remember a man named Rye, an old machinist from Pittsburgh, worked the line for 30 years. We just unpacked how the phrase "that's not my job" can shrink a man's identity down to a list of tasks, a checklist life. But what happens when that mindset doesn't just stay at work, but seeps into every corner of his life? Rye, the machinist from Pittsburgh, was never late, never missed a shift, showed up every morning at 5:00 a.m. sharp. On paper, he was dependable, reliable, the kind of man people say you can count on. But behind closed doors, Rye lived by a very different rule. One quiet phrase dictated how he showed up at home. Not my job. The dishes, not his job. Helping his teenage son make decisions about school and life, not his job. Talking through emotions with his wife, frustrations, fears, even dreams, definitely not his job. He provided, he worked, he paid the bills. He did exactly what was expected of him and not an inch more. He wore his minimal effort like a badge of honor. But in all the places where he was needed, not just assigned, Rye did the bare minimum and called it love, called it responsibility, called it being a man. And after 28 years, when his wife finally left, she didn't scream. She didn't slam the door. She just stopped hoping. And Rye, he sat at the same kitchen table in the same chair he'd always sat in and muttered, I did everything I was supposed to do. But that's just it, isn't it? He never asked what actually needed to be done, only what was written down. What was on the checklist? What could be traced back to a duty? But that's not leadership. That's silent retreat. That's a man going through the motions, not one who's present, awake, engaged. The Stoics didn't live by duty alone, they lived by purpose. Marcus Aurelius wrote, what is your vocation to be a good man? Not a man who hides behind job descriptions, but one who sees a gap and fills it, one who notices something's broken and moves to repair it. Even when it's inconvenient, even when no one's watching, even when there's no applause at the end. That's Stoic strength, showing up not just when you're told to, but when no one expects you to. Especially then, because the man who only does what's his job is quietly hoping someone else will pick up what he avoids. And when a man repeats the phrase, it's not my job, what he's really saying is, I don't want to be inconvenienced by responsibility. That's not strength. That's a slow surrender of influence. He's not setting boundaries. He's stepping back from the weight he's meant to carry. The Stoic man knows real power isn't found in what you avoid. It's found in what you embrace willingly, quietly, without needing permission. Because the moment you start outsourcing your effort, your value follows right behind it. You go from being someone people depend on to someone they simply learn to work around. And now we arrive at a phrase even more dangerous. Not because it limits your actions, but because it numbs your spirit. It's soft. It's casual. It even sounds kind of wise. But it kills something inside you every time you say it. Let's talk about the man who surrenders to apathy with just 5 words. It is what it is. According to research in behavioral science, one of the first signs of learned helplessness in adults is verbal resignation. That moment when a person stops believing that their actions can influence their reality. And no phrase signals that surrender more clearly than those 5 quiet words. It is what it is. At first it sounds stoic, detached, mature, like a man at peace. But dig deeper and you'll find something else: emotional collapse. For many men, especially those worn down by years of disappointment, rejection, or failed efforts, this phrase becomes a quiet death sentence. It's not acceptance, it's emotional surrender. Now make no mistake, the Stoics did teach us to accept what we cannot control. But they never, not once, asked us to give up agency over what we can control. Marcus Aurelius said it with clarity. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That's not apathy, that's clarity, that's control. And next we'll break down exactly how that quiet phrase, it is what it is, becomes the starting point of stagnation and how to replace it with a mindset that keeps your spirit alive. Previously, we uncovered how it is what it is sounds stoic but often masks emotional surrender. But here's the truth. Acceptance isn't the end of action, it's where action begins. When a man leans too often on that phrase, it is what it is, he's not practicing endurance anymore. He's not being wise, he's numbing himself, slowly, quietly, disguising emotional shutdown as philosophical calm. And that's not stoicism. That's sedation. Seneca sharpened the truth even more. It is not that we are given a short life, but we make it short by wasting it. And the man who uses that phrase repeatedly, he's wasting far more than time. He's wasting conviction. He's draining his sense of purpose drop by drop and calling it maturity. But it's not maturity, it's quiet defeat. And the tragedy, this mindset spreads. It seeps into everything, into your relationships, into your ambition, into your health. You stop choosing your responses, you stop fighting for what matters, and slowly you become a spectator in your own life, watching, not living. Detached, passive, fading. There's a massive difference between composure and surrender. Stoic composure says, I see this for what it is, and I will act wisely within my power. But capitulation says, I see this, and I give up. One response sharpens you, the other numbs you. And over time, one builds you into a man of clarity, the other leaves you hollow. A Stoic doesn't whisper, it is what it is, and walk away. He examines, he accepts, and then he responds not with outrage, not with despair, but with precision, with intention. Life will hurt. People will disappoint you. The world won't mold itself to your expectations. But none of that gives you permission to decay in passivity. So next time you feel those 5 words rising in your throat, stop. Ask yourself, is this true Stoic acceptance? Or am I just too tired to care? Because every time you choose passivity, you become easier to ignore. And one day you wake up not respected, not loved, not feared, just unnoticed. And that's the cruelest fate for a man who was once capable of so much more. So now we close with clarity, because now you know. These 6 phrases, they don't just sound weak. They are weakness distilled into language. And the only question left is, what will you say instead? Every man leaves a trail, sometimes in footsteps, sometimes in phrases. People don't always judge you by your plans, or even your past. They judge you by what slips out when you're not performing, when you're off guard, when you're real. And these 6 phrases, if you repeat them long enough, they become who you are. But here's the twist. That identity, it's not final. Not if you have the guts to face it. Weakness isn't the enemy. Denial is. Marcus Aurelius once said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. So if you speak like a victim, expect to suffer like one. But if you begin speaking with clarity, even when no one's listening, even in private, you begin rebuilding something that matters more than reputation. You rebuild character. The Stoic man doesn't speak to impress. He speaks with precision, with restraint, with awareness. And when he's silent, that silence has weight. So if this video hit a nerve, let it. That's where the growth starts. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. I choose strength over sound. Because foolish men fill the air, but the wise they speak and the world leans in.